The first person to tell me my marriage was a mistake wasn't a stranger. It wasn't an angry ex. It wasn't even my husband. It was my own brother. And he said it in front of my entire family. One sentence turned a peaceful Sunday dinner into the beginning of the worst betrayal I'd ever experienced. Looking back, I almost wish I'd never asked everyone to meet my husband. My name is Emily. I'm 32. And until that evening, I believed I came from the kind of family that would always stand together. We weren't perfect, but we celebrated birthdays together, spent holidays under the same roof, and called each other whenever life became difficult. I thought nothing could break those bonds. I was wrong. I met Daniel almost 2 years earlier at a charity fundraiser hosted by a local hospital. I wasn't even supposed to attend. A coworker had convinced me to go because she couldn't stand the idea of another event alone. Daniel was volunteering there, helping guests find their tables. He wasn't loud or flashy. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. While everyone else was networking, he was quietly helping an elderly couple carry their coats and making sure people felt welcome. That simple kindness caught my attention long before he noticed me. We started talking near the coffee table after I accidentally spilled my drink. Instead of laughing, he grabbed napkins, smiled, and somehow managed to make an embarrassing moment feel funny instead of awkward. By the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers. Our first date lasted almost 6 hours because neither of us wanted to leave the restaurant. Every conversation felt effortless. Every week together made me realize I'd finally met someone who made life feel peaceful instead of complicated. Daniel never played games. He never disappeared for days. He remembered the smallest details about my life, brought soup when I caught the flu, and somehow knew exactly when I needed someone to simply sit beside me without saying a word. After years of disappointing relationships, being with him felt safe. That feeling was worth more to me than expensive gifts or dramatic romance. When I introduced him to my parents a few months later, everything seemed perfect. My mom hugged him before dessert was even served. My dad spent an hour talking football with him in the backyard. Even my younger sister whispered later that she'd never seen me smile so much around anyone before. The only person who wasn't there that day was my older brother, Ryan. Ryan had recently finalized a messy divorce from his ex-wife, Sarah. The entire family knew the separation had been ugly, but nobody talked about it much. Ryan refused to discuss the details, and we respected his privacy. Whenever Sarah's name came up, he'd immediately change the subject or leave the room. Eventually, we all stopped asking questions. Months passed, and Daniel proposed during a weekend trip to a quiet lakeside cabin. There were no photographers hiding in bushes or giant crowds applauding us. Just the sunset reflecting across the water, a simple ring, and the easiest yes I'd ever spoken. Felt perfect because it was ours. Our wedding was small, beautiful, and surprisingly peaceful. Ryan attended, smiled in every photograph, toasted our marriage, and even joked with Daniel during the reception. If he had any problem with my husband, he hid it perfectly. Looking back now, I wonder if he already knew something I didn't. Nearly 8 months after the wedding, my parents suggested hosting a family dinner since everyone had been busy. I loved the idea. Daniel offered to cook one of his favorite pasta recipes while I baked dessert. It felt like another ordinary evening with the people I loved most. The night started exactly that way. Everyone laughed over old family stories. My dad teased Ryan about losing his golf tournament. My mom insisted everyone take leftovers home. Daniel fit into every conversation so naturally that it was impossible to imagine anything going wrong. Then my sister asked an innocent question. "So Daniel, where did you live before moving here?" He answered casually. "I used to live in Brookside for a few years." Ryan froze. His fork stopped halfway to his mouth. He stared at Daniel with an expression I'd never seen before. "What street?" Ryan asked quietly. Daniel answered. Ryan's face lost every bit of color. "What was your apartment number?" Daniel looked confused but answered anyway. Nobody else understood why Ryan was asking such specific questions. Then Ryan stood up so fast his chair crashed onto the floor. "No way," he whispered. The room went completely silent. He pointed directly at Daniel. "I know exactly who you are." Daniel frowned. "I'm sorry. Have we met before?" Ryan laughed. Not because something was funny, because he was furious. "You seriously don't recognize me?" Daniel stared at him for several long seconds before his own expression changed. Recognition, followed immediately by discomfort. Ryan turned toward me. You married him. I blinked. What are you talking about? Ryan looked like he was struggling to breathe. You actually married my ex-wife's ex-boyfriend. Every sound in the room disappeared. I looked from Ryan to Daniel, expecting someone to explain why this mattered. Instead, Daniel quietly lowered his eyes. I didn't realize who your sister was until the wedding rehearsal, he admitted. My heart skipped. You knew. He nodded slowly. I thought bringing it up would only reopen old wounds that had nothing to do with us. Ryan slammed both hands onto the dining table. Nothing to do with us? His voice echoed through the house. You married my sister without telling anyone you dated Sarah? My mother looked completely confused. Dated who? Ryan practically shouted. Sarah, my ex-wife. Every face around the table turned toward Daniel. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Daniel took a slow breath before answering. Yes, Sarah and I dated. Ryan laughed bitterly. And now you're sleeping with my sister. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had never heard Daniel mention Sarah. Not once. And suddenly every person at that dinner table was staring at me. As if I'd become the center of a scandal I didn't even know existed. That was the exact moment my family stopped looking at us like newlyweds and started looking at our marriage like a disgrace. The silence after Ryan's outburst was unbearable. Nobody reached for their food. Nobody even looked at their plates anymore. My mother kept glancing between Daniel and Ryan as if she were waiting for someone to laugh and admit this was all some ridiculous misunderstanding. It never came. Daniel remained seated with both hands folded together, while Ryan paced across the dining room like he was trying to stop himself from exploding. You knew exactly who she was, Ryan said, pointing at Daniel again. You knew she was my little sister, and you still married her. Daniel finally stood up. His voice stayed calm, but I could hear the regret behind every word. I recognized Emily at the rehearsal dinner, not before. By then, we had already been together for almost 2 years. I loved her. I wasn't going to throw away our relationship because of something that happened years before we even met. Ryan let out another bitter laugh. You should have told her. I wanted to. When? The day after the rehearsal. Ryan stared at him. But I realized the wedding was 24 hours away. I thought bringing up ancient history at that point would destroy everything. My father rubbed his forehead and sighed. Can somebody please explain exactly what happened between you and Sarah? Ryan looked away. Daniel answered first. We dated for about 6 months. Ryan immediately interrupted. Tell them the whole story. Daniel nodded slowly. We met after she and Ryan had already divorced. That sentence changed everything. I looked at Ryan. You said you dated her after the divorce? Daniel nodded. Months after. Ryan crossed his arms. So what? So, I whispered. There wasn't any cheating? Daniel shook his head. Never. Ryan quickly answered before anyone else could speak. It doesn't matter. It absolutely matters, I replied. He ignored me. You still dated my ex-wife. Daniel remained calm. Your ex-wife, not your wife. Ryan's jaw tightened. My mother stepped between them before either man could move any closer. This is ridiculous, she said. They're divorced. Nobody cheated. Nobody betrayed anyone. Ryan looked at our parents in disbelief. So you're taking his side? There are no sides, Dad answered. We're trying to understand. Ryan slammed his fist against the countertop. You don't get it. His voice echoed through the kitchen. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I had been quiet until then, trying to process everything, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. Ryan, I didn't even know Sarah. He looked at me. Exactly. So how could I have done anything wrong? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. For a second I thought he'd calm down. Instead he pointed directly at my wedding ring. Every time I see that ring, all I'm going to think about is him dating my ex-wife. The room fell silent again. Daniel finally spoke. I'm sorry you feel that way. Ryan laughed. You're sorry? Yes. You expect that to fix this? No. Then why say it? Because hurting you was never my intention. Ryan shook his head. You should have walked away from Emily the second you recognized who she was. Daniel answered without hesitation. No. That single word made Ryan furious. You chose yourself over this family. Daniel looked him directly in the eyes. I chose my wife. Those 3 words stayed with me long after the argument ended. I chose my wife. For the first time that night, someone had chosen me. Ryan grabbed his jacket. If he stays in this family, I won't. He walked out the front door so hard the picture frames on the hallway wall rattled. Nobody moved for almost a full minute. Eventually, my mother sat down and quietly started crying. I can't believe tonight ended like this. Dad looked exhausted. This whole thing should have been discussed months ago. Daniel nodded. I know. So why didn't you? Daniel looked at me before answering. Because I was afraid. I frowned. Afraid of what? Losing you. He looked genuinely ashamed. I convinced myself Ryan would never find out. I couldn't even argue with him. Not because he was right, but because I knew fear makes people make terrible decisions. The dinner ended early. Nobody wanted dessert. Nobody wanted leftovers. Everyone left with heavy hearts. During the drive home, neither of us spoke. The silence between Daniel and me wasn't angry. It was filled with questions. Finally, I asked the one that had been sitting in my chest all night. Did you love her? He kept his eyes on the road. No. You dated her. I cared about her. But not like you love me. He immediately answered. Not even close. I believed him. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I was being naive. But after everything we'd shared over 2 years together, I knew when Daniel was telling the truth. What I didn't know was that the worst part hadn't happened yet. The next morning, I woke up to 23 missed calls, 7 text messages, 4 voicemails, and a family group chat that had exploded overnight. Ryan hadn't simply left dinner. He had told our entire extended family that I had married the man who stole his dignity. Within hours, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were messaging me. An aunt I'd always admired called my marriage disgusting. My uncle wrote that I should have divorced Daniel immediately if I had any respect for my brother. The messages kept coming. Every few minutes, one after another. Some begged me to leave Daniel. Others accused him of manipulating me. A few even suggested he had married me just to get revenge on Ryan. The accusations were so absurd they almost sounded laughable. Almost, until I noticed something. Every single person telling me to leave my husband had only heard Ryan's version of the story. None of them had spoken to Daniel. None of them had asked what really happened. And none of them knew the one secret about Ryan's marriage. That Daniel had refused to reveal. A secret that could destroy Ryan's entire story with a single sentence. I spent the next 3 days watching my family slowly disappear from my life. It didn't happen all at once. It happened through unanswered phone calls, ignored messages, canceled plans, and conversations that suddenly ended the moment I entered the room. People who had known me my entire life had decided they already knew the truth without asking me a single question. Ryan's version had become the family's version, and somehow Daniel and I had become the villains. The hardest part wasn't the accusations. It was the disappointment. My parents refused to take sides, but everyone else had already chosen one. My cousins stopped inviting us to birthdays. My aunt removed me from the family vacation group chat. Even relatives who barely knew Daniel spoke about him like he'd committed some unforgivable betrayal. Every notification on my phone made my stomach tighten because I knew it would be another lecture about loyalty. Another message telling me I should choose my brother over my husband. Daniel never defended himself publicly. He never argued in the family chat. He never posted cryptic messages online. He simply went to work, came home, and quietly carried the weight of everyone's judgment. Every evening I'd find him sitting on the back porch staring into the yard, replaying everything that had happened. One night, I asked him why he wasn't fighting back. He looked at me and said, "Because the moment I expose Ryan's secret, your family will never recover." That answer only created more questions. What secret? He stayed silent. Daniel, I promised someone I would never tell. Promised who? He hesitated for several seconds. Sarah. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My brother's ex-wife? He nodded. Before I could ask another question, he quietly stood up and walked inside, ending the conversation. That was the first time since we'd met that he had deliberately hidden something from me. It wasn't because he didn't trust me. I could see the guilt in his eyes. It was because he believed revealing the truth would destroy more lives than it would save. A week later, my mother invited me to lunch. She specifically asked me to come alone. I already knew Daniel wasn't welcome. She looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes, and she barely touched her food. "I talked to Ryan," she said softly. I already knew how that conversation had gone. "He still won't come to family gatherings if Daniel is there." I sighed. "So I'm being punished for marrying someone he doesn't like?" She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I don't want this family to fall apart." "Neither do I." "Then maybe." She stopped talking. I looked at her. "Maybe what?" She swallowed. "Maybe you and Daniel could take a little break until everyone calms down." Those words hurt more than anything Ryan had said. "You want me to separate from my husband?" "No." "That's exactly what you're asking. I'm asking for peace." I slowly pulled my hand away. Peace shouldn't require sacrificing my marriage. She didn't answer, because she knew I was right. As I walked toward my car afterward, I noticed someone standing across the parking lot. A woman. She looked familiar. Then it hit me. Sarah, Ryan's ex-wife. She cautiously walked toward me. "I know this is strange," she said. I nodded. "You have no reason to trust me." "Probably not." She smiled sadly. "I just wanted to apologize." I frowned. "For what?" "For what's happening to you." "Hier." "You didn't do anything." "I kind of did." She looked around before continuing. "Ryan is blaming Daniel because it's easier than admitting why our marriage actually ended." My heart started racing. "What does that mean?" She took a deep breath. "Ryan never told anyone the truth." I could barely breathe. "What truth?" She looked directly into my eyes. "Our marriage didn't end because of another man." I waited. "It ended because Ryan had been having an affair for almost a year." Everything around me seemed to stop. "What?" She nodded slowly. "I found the messages." I couldn't speak. "I found hotel receipts." My hands started shaking. "I found bank statements." Every accusation Ryan had thrown at Daniel suddenly felt completely different. "He begged me not to tell anyone." Sarah looked away. "So I agreed." "Why?" "Because his parents loved him." I whispered. "So Daniel knew?" She nodded. "He was the only person I ever told." "And he kept your secret?" "For 3 years." Suddenly everything made sense. Ryan wasn't angry because Daniel had dated his ex-wife. Ryan was terrified. Terrified that the one person who knew the real reason his marriage ended had become part of our family. I leaned against my car, trying to process everything. "So all of this is about protecting Ryan's reputation," Sarah finished. Tears filled my eyes. "My entire family hates my husband. Because Ryan lied." She nodded. "I never wanted this." "Neither did I." Before leaving, Sarah handed me a small envelope. "I've carried these for years." I looked inside. Printed screenshots, bank statements, photos, hotel invoices. Every piece of evidence proving Ryan had been unfaithful. I looked back at her. "Why are you giving these to me now?" She answered quietly. "Because Daniel kept my secret when he didn't have to." She paused. "But I'm not going to let him lose his family for a lie." I drove home in complete silence. The envelope sat on the passenger seat the entire way. When I walked through the front door, Daniel immediately knew something had happened. He looked at the envelope, then at my face. "You met Sarah." It wasn't a question. I slowly nodded. He closed his eyes. "I'm sorry." I placed the envelope on the kitchen table. "You knew." He nodded once. "You protected Ryan." Another nod. "And now he's destroying our lives." Daniel stared at the floor. I thought staying silent was the right thing. I opened the envelope, spread every document across the table, then looked back at my husband. "We're done protecting him." Daniel didn't answer, but the fear on his face told me something I hadn't considered before. He wasn't afraid of Ryan anymore. He was afraid of what my family would do. Once they discovered that the man they'd spent weeks defending was actually the one who had destroyed his own marriage all along. The next morning, I called my parents and asked everyone to come over that evening. I didn't explain why. I simply said it was important and that I wouldn't repeat myself twice. My mother sounded nervous. My father asked if everything was okay. I answered with one sentence. No. But tonight, everyone is finally going to hear the truth. Within an hour, Ryan started calling me nonstop. I ignored every call. Then the text started. What are you doing? Sarah contacted you, didn't she? Don't make a mistake you'll regret. We can talk about this privately. I never replied. For the first time since this nightmare had begun. Ryan wasn't acting confident anymore. He sounded scared. Daniel watched me reading the messages. You don't have to do this, he said quietly. I looked at him in disbelief. They destroyed your reputation. I know. They turned my own family against us. I know. They've called you a liar, a manipulator, a homewrecker. I know. I stepped closer and grabbed both of his hands. Then why are you still trying to protect him? Daniel let out a long breath before answering. Because once this comes out, your parents will never look at Ryan the same way again. I shook my head. That's not your fault. He looked away. It still feels like it is. That was Daniel's biggest flaw. He always carried guilt that belonged to other people. By 6 that evening, my parents arrived first. Then my aunt and uncle. 2 cousins came after that. Finally, Ryan walked in wearing the same smug expression he'd worn for weeks. He looked around the living room and laughed. So what is this? En intervention. Nobody answered. He dropped onto the couch like he owned the house. I hope this isn't about Daniel apologizing. Daniel remained completely silent. Ryan smirked. Didn't think so. I waited until everyone had settled down before speaking. I asked all of you here because you've spent the last month judging my husband. Nobody interrupted. You've called him selfish. Silence. You've called him disloyal. More silence. You've blamed him for destroying this family. Ryan crossed his arms. Because he did. I slowly picked up the brown envelope sitting on the coffee table. No. I looked directly into Ryan's eyes. You did. His smile disappeared instantly. What are you talking about? I pulled out the first photograph. Hotel receipt. Second receipt. Bank statements. Printed text messages. Every piece of evidence Sarah had given me. Ryan's face turned pale before I'd even shown anyone else. He knew exactly what was inside. I handed the documents to my father. His expression changed as he flipped through the pages. What is this? Ryan stood up immediately. Don't read those. Too late. My father's hands started shaking. My mother leaned closer. Her face drained of color. My aunt covered her mouth. One by one, every person in the room began reading. Nobody spoke. The silence became unbearable. Finally, my father looked at Ryan. Tell me these aren't real. Ryan swallowed. There. He couldn't finish the sentence. My father repeated himself louder. Tell me they're fake. Ryan looked at me instead. You promised. I frowned. I never promised you anything. No. Sarah promised. The room froze. Every pair of eyes turned toward him. Without realizing it, he'd admitted Sarah knew everything, which meant the evidence was real. My father slowly lowered the papers. You cheated on your wife? Ryan rubbed his forehead. It wasn't like that. My aunt laughed bitterly. That's every cheater's favorite sentence. Ryan pointed toward Daniel. He knew. Daniel finally spoke. Yes. Ryan immediately seized on it. See? He hid it. Daniel calmly nodded. I did. Ryan smiled triumphantly. He helped cover it up. Before anyone could react, Daniel quietly said something none of us expected. Because Sarah begged me not to destroy your relationship with your parents. Ryan stopped smiling. I kept your secret because I believed people deserved a second chance. Complete silence. You told me you wanted to become a better husband. Ryan stared at the floor. You cried in my office. Now everyone looked confused. I frowned. Office. Daniel sighed. I've never told anyone this. He looked toward my parents. Ryan used to work for my company. The room exploded. What? My father blinked repeatedly. What company? Daniel looked embarrassed. I own the consulting firm Ryan worked at before starting his current job. I stared at him. You were his boss? He nodded. For almost 4 years. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Ryan hadn't just known Daniel casually. Daniel had literally given him his career. My mother whispered, "Ryan, is that true?" Ryan looked trapped. "Yes," Daniel continued quietly. When Sarah found the affair, Ryan thought he'd lose everything. He looked at Ryan. "You came into my office crying." Ryan closed his eyes. "You asked me not to tell anyone. I didn't want Mom and Dad to know." Daniel nodded. "So I stayed silent." He looked around the room. "I even wrote him a recommendation letter after he resigned." Everyone stared at Ryan with complete disbelief. Daniel wasn't his enemy. He had protected him, helped him, saved his reputation, and Ryan had repaid him by trying to destroy his marriage. My father slowly stood. "I defended you." Ryan didn't answer. "I accused Daniel." Still silence. "I almost lost my daughter because I believed you." Ryan finally looked up. "I was scared." My father slammed the papers onto the table. "So you framed an innocent man?" "No." "You let this family hate him." "I didn't mean." "You watched us abandon him." Ryan tried to speak again, but nobody wanted to hear it anymore. For the first time in weeks, everyone saw exactly who had been manipulating them. But just when I thought everything was finally over, Ryan quietly said something that made the entire room go silent again. "I didn't tell the biggest lie." Every head turned toward him. He looked directly at me. "You still don't know why Daniel really started dating Sarah after our divorce." Daniel's face instantly changed. Not fear, not guilt, panic. I looked at my husband. He had gone completely pale. Whatever Ryan was about to reveal was something Daniel had desperately hoped I would never find out. The room became so quiet that I could hear the ticking of the clock on the living room wall. Ryan's words hung in the air. "You still don't know why Daniel really started dating Sarah after our divorce." I turned toward my husband. For the first time since we'd met, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Not the fear of being caught in a lie, the fear of losing someone he loved. "Daniel," I whispered. He closed his eyes for a second before looking back at me.
I'm sorry.
Ryan laughed bitterly. "There it is." My stomach tightened. "What is he talking about?" Daniel took a slow breath. "The only reason I never told you is because it wasn't my secret to tell." Ryan folded his arms. "Go ahead." Daniel looked at everyone gathered in the room. "Sarah and I didn't meet because we were looking for a relationship." Nobody spoke. We met in a grief counseling group. The room fell silent. Ryan frowned. "What?" Daniel continued quietly. 3 months after the divorce, Sarah lost her younger sister in a car accident. Everyone looked shocked. At the same time, he paused. "I had just lost my mother to cancer." I felt my heart sink. Daniel had told me years ago that his mother passed away before we met, but he'd never explained how devastating that period of his life had been. We were two broken people sitting in the same room every Thursday night. His voice trembled. We talked. We cried. We helped each other survive. He looked toward Ryan. "That's how we became friends." Ryan stared at him silently. Months later, we tried dating. Daniel shrugged sadly. It lasted 6 months. Not because we were deeply in love, but because two grieving people convinced themselves they could heal each other. Sarah slowly stepped into the room. Nobody had noticed she'd quietly arrived after my text asking if she would come. She looked directly at my parents. "He's telling the truth." Everyone turned toward her. "There was never some great romance." She smiled sadly. "We were just two lonely people." She looked toward Daniel. "He helped me survive the hardest year of my life." Then she looked toward Ryan. "And he even encouraged me to forgive you." Ryan's head snapped up. "What?" Sarah nodded. "You don't know this, but every single time I complained about you, Daniel defended you." Ryan looked completely stunned. "He told me not to hate you. He told me anger would only destroy me. He told me someday you'd regret your mistakes." Tears filled Sarah's eyes. "The man you've spent weeks destroying, spent months trying to help me stop hating you." Nobody in the room could believe what they were hearing. My father slowly sat down. My mother covered her mouth. Even my aunt, who had been the loudest critic of Daniel, looked ashamed. Ryan stared at Daniel for what felt like forever. Finally, he whispered, "Why?" Daniel answered immediately. Because despite everything, you were still Emily's brother. Ryan's eyes filled with tears. You protected me. Yes. You protected my marriage. I tried. You protected my relationship with Mom and Dad. Yes. You even helped Sarah forgive me. Daniel nodded one last time. I thought it was the right thing to do. Ryan suddenly broke down. Not the fake crying people do when they're caught. Real crying. The kind that comes from finally seeing yourself clearly. He buried his face in his hands. I don't deserve any of you. Nobody answered, because nobody could disagree. After several minutes, he stood up and walked over to Daniel. I've spent the last month trying to destroy your marriage. His voice cracked. When you've spent the last 3 years protecting my life. Daniel remained silent. Ryan looked him in the eyes.
I'm sorry.
I was jealous. I couldn't accept that the man who knew my worst mistake ended up living the life I wanted. I blamed you because it was easier than blaming myself. Daniel stared at him for several seconds. Then, to everyone's surprise, he hugged him. The room collectively exhaled. My mother started crying. My father walked over and hugged both of them. Even my aunt wiped tears from her eyes. Then Ryan turned toward me. I'm so sorry. I hugged my brother tightly. I forgive you. He looked surprised. You do. I forgive you. I smiled softly. But rebuilding trust will take time. He nodded. I understand. Over the next few months, our family slowly healed. Not overnight. Not perfectly. But honestly, Ryan publicly apologized to every family member he had misled. He personally called everyone who had insulted Daniel and admitted the truth. Sarah finally found peace and started a new chapter of her life. My parents welcomed Daniel back with open arms. And every Sunday dinner slowly began feeling like home again. One evening, months later, my father pulled Daniel aside after dinner. I watched them talking from the kitchen. Eventually, my father hugged him. On the drive home, I asked what they'd discussed. Daniel smiled. He said, he laughed quietly. I thought I lost a son when Ryan got divorced. He looked at me. Turns out I gained one when you married my daughter. I felt tears fill my eyes. That single sentence erased months of pain. Sometimes families aren't destroyed by one terrible mistake. They're destroyed by pride, by silence, by half-truths, and by refusing to admit we're wrong. Our family survived because eventually, the truth became louder than the lies. And that's a lesson I'll never forget. If this story touched your heart, comment, the truth always wins. Don't forget to like, subscribe to Niver Tales, and turn on notifications for more unforgettable Reddit stories with emotional twists, shocking family drama, and satisfying endings. Until the next story, take care.